So I wanted to talk about the evidence-informed approach to improving teaching and learning, and a little bit about the journey that we've been on. I thought it would be helpful to just go for a little bit of context. Although I'll kind of focus in on a lesson structure and a QA process in particular, so you know, there's obviously a few strands of improvement that we've been working on at the same time, so it does fit into a broader range of areas. So firstly, we needed to and still need to significantly improve our outcomes. It was a good time to refresh our college teaching and learning strategies, review our approach to reading, to have agreed strategies and principles on which to base our methods going forward. We had started but wanted to complete a review of our whole curriculum, both in terms of our curriculum offer and in terms of schemes of learning and resources associated with it. Improve our procedures with regard to student conduct. It was good, but it wasn't great, and it's something we wanted to improve. Align strategies with, at that point, a relatively new Ofsted framework. And crucially, which amazingly was one of the harder things to do, stop doing things that were not having an impact. We were given some really good advice from Tony Bloxham, who's here this afternoon, and he recommended looking at a lesson structure. So I know some of you will be familiar with it already from your own schools, but in brief, that's the lesson structure that we implemented: entry routine, retrieval phase, instructional phase, deliberate practice, consolidation, followed by an exit routine. We wanted the lesson structure to be based on evidence. What we used was the Rosenshine's Principle of Instruction, in particular Tom Sherrington's book, which is something we got and distributed to all staff to make sure that they were understanding what we were working from. Principles of cognitive psychology that had appeared in the Ofsted framework fairly recently, and we wanted to see, based on effective proven practice in the classroom, and so we used a lot of the Greenshaw principles of teaching, which something that Tony was helping us to be familiar with, but since Greenshaw have been fantastic in helping us along as well. We wanted to embed research-based methods in the classroom, so promote retrieval by revisiting previous learning in every lesson, optimise students' working memory, develop reading and writing, develop modelling, scaffolding, and dedicate time for the consolidation of learning. We were previously running with plenaries at the end of the lesson, but it wasn't tight enough and wasn't having the desired impact. We wanted to make optimum use of time in lessons, which we didn't feel like we were doing, and have a consistent method used by all staff, and consistent expectations understood by everybody. So in terms of securing buy-in engagement, I've done this as a kind of a timeline, if you like, just to give it again a bit of context of this period of time that we worked through. So going back to last academic year, we wanted to integrate what we were currently doing, which we thought would improve our curriculum offer. So we'd started a review of the curriculum, but we wanted to continue it for that year. CPD was provided on cognitive psychology. We had a couple of psychology experts within our team, so we utilised their expertise. We wanted to make sure that people were clear on the change of emphasis from Ofsted, because I think most people would agree that was quite a change, a welcome one from my perspective. We also were planning to conduct a review of each department so that we could establish more specific strengths and weaknesses. And following our inspection, we were able to invite some of the inspectors back to do some work with us, which we've never had the opportunity to do before. And Tony's done some really good work with us, and we're very grateful for his time with us as well. So that was all going on during term one. We looked at this lesson structure. We were all very keen to use it and to implement it in the school. We wanted to make sure that at the point where we changed, because we were conscious we were going to change mid-year, we wanted to make sure that we had tested it and had time to really make sure that we were confident with it. So the maths department helped us out with a pilot ahead of time before we went whole college, made sure that curriculum leaders had plenty of time to understand the structure before we gave it to staff, introduced changes to staff, and at the same time as what we'll stop doing, to make sure that they were clear what we were doing, what we were not going to be doing anymore, so they didn't feel done unto. Launched the lesson structure in term 3, always going fantastic, and then sadly lockdown happened and slowed us down a bit. In terms of the quality assurance, again, along with some of those principles I mentioned before, from Greenshaw, we introduced this developmental drop-in process alongside to improve teaching, ensure a consistent approach to development, consistent area of focus is for development for SLT and the whole school at any given time, a low stakes method of monitoring the principles of teaching, and moving away from observations, which was a breath of fresh air for us. To be able to judge the impact of the changes we were making, identify training, CPD for the whole college and department, and to be able to actually share strength and strategies and resources amongst the teams and between them as well. The manner in which the DDI process works was perfect in terms of balancing that support with challenge, because the coaching that we're giving staff and still are is on a very bespoke basis for individuals. In terms of challenges, barriers, successes, challenges, we're creating the time and capacity to make sure that we got this piece of work done and done well, so that we launched it successfully and smoothly. It's always difficult doing stuff mid-year, as I mentioned, so that was tough, but something that needed to be done. And actually, I can say for our body of staff, we had a really, really good buy-in. Supporting staff through the change is obviously part of our job, but was a challenge as well. And trying to move away from specification-driven teaching, rather than people feeling they've got to cover content, they've got to get through the content, to actually really step back and think about the knowledge and skills that make it up. In terms of barriers, supporting inexperienced staff, we've got a lot of NQTs. I mean, that's not a complaint. It's just something that we need to really help them with. Conversely, supporting experienced staff, as we all know, old habits can die hard when you're changing something so drastically, and that variation in application. And no matter how clear the guidance, it's amazing how far people can stray from it. In terms of successes, it was literally immediate. We did it at the same time as some changes to our conduct procedures, and the impact, you could feel it immediately in terms of the calmness around the school. It was a refreshed focus for SLT, which we were grateful for, and a refreshed focus and some release for staff. I think staff felt confident with what we were doing and why, and I think that made them feel better for having that. And overall, the response of our students was absolutely amazing. We made a point of really communicating well with them, of doing assemblies and explaining in detail what we were doing and why ahead of time, and they've been absolutely fantastic. In terms of developing expertise, I wanted to use and develop a range of expertise. So we had external visitors to scrutinise aspects of what we were doing. I mentioned before, using the expertise that we already had. We managed to get some really productive visits to outstanding schools, in particular with really positive Progress 8 outcomes. We went to Leicester and Fulhurst, and then through Tony and through Greenshaw. We've been lucky enough to be able to visit a couple of their schools as well, which has been really good and a real eye-opener for me and Julie and our SLT team. Similarly, some of the local schools, Torbridge and Eggbrook and the Lipson in particular, we're really grateful to them for letting us come along and see what they're doing when they were a bit further along the line than us. Invested a lot of time for the 5 members of SLT to implement this, made sure it's the same people doing the DDIs, and weekly discussions between that team. We run CPD ahead of each DDI focus, you know, the actual policy, what we're expecting, the do's and don'ts, a few tips, and then in between each phase, we kind of tell people what our findings are, and developments and more do's and don'ts. In terms of early impact, like I said, immediate impact was a calmer and more productive college. Impact of new strategy becoming embedded now. We're only 20 weeks in. It feels like a very long time, but because of the 6 months we were all out of school, I have to remind myself we're only in week 20 of doing this now. Focus on teachers teaching knowledge and skills and the students retaining them has been really refreshing. We've fairly recently had a really encouraging visit from Will Smith and Ben Parnell from Greenshaw, which we were really pleased to host. Continuing to tweak strategies to improve them. We've had some really good input from Izzy Ambrose at Yate Academy, again, which we're very grateful for, in terms of the next steps for us developing our DDI process. We're trying to start to involve curriculum leaders a little bit in terms of joint visits so they can see what we can see, not to actually complete the DDIs themselves. Looking at gap filling revision within the lesson structure and how that fits. Maintaining continuity, obviously, in our current situation, which applies to all of you. and developing our principles of teaching alongside the lesson structure. We put a lesson structure in place first, and now something we're trying to implement is those 6 principles of teaching as well. So working through that. Hopefully that's within the time. I apologise if I've spoken quickly. I just wanted to make sure I didn't hold anyone up. Any questions?
No, that's great, George. Thank you so much. You did an amazing job to cover everything so comprehensively within quite a short amount of time. I just wanted to welcome also Catherine, who's just been able to join us. Tony's hand has gone straight up. You're welcome, Catherine. Don't worry. So if you want to if you do want to ask a question, just raise your hand and I'll bring you each in individually. Tony.
So if you remember, the origin of this webinar was a visit that we wanted to, or a rotation of visits that we wanted to create around these 3 schools. And that was particularly because each of the 3 schools were at slightly different stages, and we're doing some really interesting thinking about how you go about applying the principles and practically and pragmatically what that actually meant for teacher pedagogy in the classroom. And so Cass really started getting me thinking on this, and I know that at Marine there's been quite a focus on the Limov stuff and Teach Like a Champion, and so I was really keen that you guys came together to see where you were about particularly moving stuck teachers on who understood the principles but found it difficult to interpret them in actual pedagogical approaches in the classroom. So I kind of leave that floating, and if you can sort of cover that in your presentations, that would be great.
Thank you. Any other questions at this stage? The other point also to add, I think I sort of alluded to it at the beginning of the session, is afterwards. The idea is that this will become a professional learning community. So there'll be an opportunity, obviously, to connect with individuals, to have follow-up conversations afterwards, whether that's by email or video conferences. And we can talk together at a later date in the new year about how we might orchestrate that. Right. Okay. I will now invite Jenny to share her screen and share with us the journey that Marine have been on.
Hi everyone, just introduce myself. I'm Jenny from Marine Academy. I'll just try and share my window, so if you let me know when you can see it. Any luck?
Yeah.
Let me try again. Oh, hold on. I think it's because the email reminder has come up on my thing. Let's try that now.
I sometimes find it easier, Jenny, to go through the browse function. I don't know if you've got that coming up as an option rather than clicking on the desktop icon.
Where's that?
When you go onto screen share through the the arrow, the share content, it gives you it comes up with a browse function, which means you have to go through the irregular kind of file system to find your PowerPoint.
Ah, right.
That might be, sometimes I find that easier.
Okay.
Kaz, do you want to just get yourself ready in case we come to you to buy
first, and then I'll try and get mine back, and then
yeah, that sounds sensible. Yeah, we'll do that, Jenny. So Kaz, are you happy to step up and do your input now, and then we'll go back to Jenny?
There we go. Yeah,
make sure you're sharing on the right screen, because I think there's 3 of you at the moment. You there, Kaz? Aha, yeah, we've got it. I think you're on mute, Kaz.
There we go.
Yes, perfect. Over to you.
Okay. So I'm going to present a part of our school improvement journey, and then follow up with some reflections really around what we mean by research-led and evidence-informed, because it's a phrase, a term that we've been using increasingly over the last couple of years or so, but I think it means different things to different people. So I'm just going to provide some reflections about what that means to me, and hopefully start up a discussion around it. So just for some context, very similar to George at Sir John Hunt, we've got a very structured approach to teaching and learning, and the development of teaching and learning, starting with the vision, which we made sure was easy to communicate, and also easy for us and our colleagues to be held accountable for. And you can see under the how we're going to get there, again, similar to Sir John Hunt, we've got the two frameworks that our teaching is based around. So we've got the stages of lessons and the principles of teaching. And this is supported by a CPD cycle that, as you can see there, starts off with a launch, and then the DDIs, an evaluation at the end of the semester, and then importantly a decision as to whether or not we're ready to move on to the next principle of teaching or not. So it's a very considered approach, and it's a deliberate one to make sure that we are making good, solid developments and not trying to rush ahead of ourselves without embedding any particular stage. Now, we were visited by Tony, I think just towards the end of the first CPD cycle, when we were looking at Principle 2, the quality of instruction. And we were confident that what he would see would be the vision in practice. I think over a short period of time, we'd made some quite noticeable systemic improvements. And to be honest, the feedback reflected this. I hope Tony's nodding. Teaching was consistently good, with some examples, I think, of excellent practice. But the main criticism, and I suppose it's not really a criticism, the main challenge that Tony gave us was that he saw lots of what he called incremental teaching, believed that we had the teachers and the students to secure optimal teaching. And these are terms that I hadn't really come across before in teaching. And we tried to gain a sense of what this actually meant. And I think the key difference is that incremental teaching delivers good progress, whereas optimal teaching secures accelerated progress. And then breaking it down in terms of, you know, what could take us there, there's one area that we identified that we believe would secure that pathway to optimal teaching, and that was the explicit teaching of vocabulary. So our approach was intentionally not to add anything new, but to use it to inform what we were currently doing. And I think there has to remain a coherence within the teaching and learning plan. I think it's too easy to end up with lots of kind of disparate sets of strategies that don't really feed into each other. So we stuck with Principle 2 for an additional CPD cycle, but we looked at it through the lens of vocab. So here we've got the principles of better practice in terms of quality of instruction. And again, you can see quite clearly mirrored against Rosenshine. But then we adapted it to look at it purely from a vocab perspective. So what I'm going to do is just go through a few examples about how this translated into practice. So, for example, when we asked teachers to share their learning outcomes, we now ask them to also share the keywords at the start of the lesson and to explicitly focus on that. So giving it real prominence right from the very start of the lesson. We also introduced a modelling template, which was the same as the scaffolding template as well, the one that's being presented. And we developed this almost mantra-like phrase of give them the words. So whenever we expected students to use key vocabulary, we saw it as our job to give them those words, to make them explicit, and to almost kind of bully, cajole them into using it so that they'd kind of be flooded with these words, with these terms, and be able to apply them confidently. And then we looked at questioning as an area as well, and we incorporated some of the Teach Like a Champion strategies to script how vocab specific questions could be phrased and then followed up with depending on the student's response. And again, we weren't introducing TLAC as a discrete CPD thread as a strategy in itself. We tried to use it as a natural extension of the strategies that we were already implementing. So That's just kind of a very brief overview of one aspect of our teaching and learning improvement journey. And I'm going to look at it now from a research and evidence-based perspective. So this is where we started, and it's a compelling reason to focus on vocab, although it doesn't provide any solutions or doesn't tell us anything that we don't already know. But I think what research does is it quantifies an issue, and for some reason, quantifying an issue with staff seems to get better buy-in. So it's a good starting place, but it's by no means any solutions. So then we look at the research, and I think there's a real danger that we have a very pure idea about what constitutes research and evidence, and unless it looks like this, then it has no merit. And I think sometimes, you know, when I say we're going to do something and we're going to base it on research, I think sometimes we hold ourselves to an expectation that this is what research looks like and this is what we should be engaging in. And I think the danger is that if we hold this as the expectation of what evidence informs means, then we'll just end up down a rabbit hole. I think, you know, for each piece of research that we can find that substantiates something, there's another 10 pieces of research that counters it or looks at the nuances of it. So I think, you know, the next stage for us really is to look at research which has already been collated and interpreted for teachers, such as Hattie. And I know that we've referenced Hattie a lot in the past in all kind of contexts. But I think one of the issues with Hattie is that it provides a very high level review of research and of the data. It provides kind of areas to focus on, to steer you towards, but you know, these areas can be done well or they can be done poorly, and the effects aren't guaranteed. So it doesn't really direct in terms of translatable strategies to use in the classroom. Now, we found that EEF has given a really good balance actually between research evidence and how it can be practically applied in the classroom. And we did use their paper around good implementation to plan and monitor the focus on vocabulary. And here's an example of it. Now, if you've not looked at it, I really do commend it and suggest that you have a look, because it kind of quite nicely walks you through what an implementation process looks like from the start all the way through to the final outcomes, and prompts some really good conversations and reflections around that. But I think what we have access to now, and I think what's making the biggest difference certainly to our use of evidence now, is the wealth of really good publications that now seem to bridge the gap between research and that practical application in the classroom. And we've used each of these books, as I know many colleagues, you know, on the webinar here have, to develop specific techniques that we can use in the classroom. So I think, you know, our use of research and the availability of research has moved on quite a bit in quite a short period of time. But for me, research is only one part of an evidence base. Going back to what George was saying, I think arguably the most useful evidence is seeing something in action, for example, through trust collaboration. So, you know, we find a school where something's working particularly well, we go there, we look at the impact, we talk to the teachers and the leaders about the sustainability of it. We look at what's happening in the classroom, how this translates into the work in students' books. But you can also ask questions and look at other factors that may be separate but related, that have a bearing on anything that you want to implement. And for us, again, similar to George, it was our visit to Yate Academy that really informed a level of expectation, and also the stages of lessons, the principles of teaching that I presented earlier, and that whole approach to embedding a coherent approach to teaching and learning across an institution. And then finally, I guess the best place for evidence-informed practice is within our own contexts. We know the variables, we know the competing factors, and we're able to benchmark anything that we're doing, you know, in terms of impact against what was happening previously. And we can do it with a real honesty. You know, we're not trying to convince anyone or pull all over anyone's eyes. We can do this with a real sense of honesty, because what we want is to see those real tangible improvements. So when Tony provided us with that feedback around vocab being a potential route to optimal teaching, that in itself was evidence, but we didn't necessarily take it as read. We are started to try a few of the strategies that we had come up with through the research. Some of it worked, some of it was too clunky, didn't really assimilate to what we were doing in our teaching approach. But out of that came some really solid strategies that were viable, where we could see that they had an impact, not necessarily an immediate impact in terms of outcomes, but through the students' oracy and to the work in their books, we could see that they were certainly much more confident with their use of vocab, which in turn was having an impact on their wider learning. And those that were working, we embrace them, and we continually to evaluate them as far as we can in the context. Just to finish off, I think we are trying to position ourselves as a research and evidence-based school, and something that we found useful is to share this with staff and to parents. We don't just make things up, we try to share in as accessible way as possible the reasons why we do things, and we have had good feedback from parents around this, especially those that might question our approach to particular things. I think it's a good way to steer a conversation around the aspect of what we're doing, we do because it's either proven to work through research or it's proven to work in the best schools. Okay, so that's just a whistle-stop tour of just one kind of micro aspect of our school improvement in terms of teaching and learning, and some of the ways that research and evidence have played a role in that, and some kind of reflections around what evidence informed actually means within that context. There we go.
Thank you, Kaz. That was really great, particularly that sort of philosophy, the vision for the use of research to inform the development of practice. That template that you just showed right at the end there, is that something that you'd be willing to share? I'll share the slides obviously with the rest of the participants this evening. Would you be willing to share the template as something that people could perhaps look at? Thank you. I thought, any questions? Tony, you've got your hand up, but I'm assuming it's an old hand, unless you want to put, is it an old hand? It's an old hand, it's gone down. I was going to, actually, if there aren't any questions forthcoming, Harriet and Becky, I hope you don't mind, I was going to put you on the spot if you're still with us. Given the conversations that I've had with you separately over the last couple of weeks, and the input that you've just heard from George and Kaz, is there anything there that automatically is making you think it's worth a follow-up conversation or a connection, or that's cleared up an area of ambiguity around Rose and Shine, or whether it's the explicit teaching of vocabulary?
I don't mind talking first, if that's okay, Krista.
Yeah, thanks, Becky.
So I thought it was really interesting from George's presentation, actually, in terms of the way in which the interpretation of Rose and Shine has gone into that sort of prescribed lesson format, which is great, and the terminology that's been used there is something that we're at the start of that journey, really. So that's something that I've taken away from that, and it's so nice to hear everybody seems to be doing the developmental drop-ins and the impact that they're having being positive. So yeah, we're in a position a bit further on in terms of implementing Rose and Shine, and so it's nice to hear those stories and given me some definite food for thought there.
Great, thanks, Becky. Harriet?
Yep, I just wanted to ask, when you do so a question for Kaz, when you do the vocabulary, and you said it has to be explicit that teachers say the keywords in the lesson. It's just a practical aspect. Do you have a kind of a fixed set of resources, slides, templates that teachers have to create their lessons for? Do they do that independently?
No, they do it independently. I mean, we have shared lots of examples of templates, and either, we have a very fixed start to the lesson, so the way in which the starter is presented and the way in which the learning outcome is presented. And I think staff to kind of naturally fall in line in terms of the way that we display it there. But, I know arts do it in a wonderfully creative way. I think sport and performing arts, because of the nature of the lessons, the practical aspect, they use great big kind of whiteboards, and they carry around with them and write the keywords up on. Does that answer your question? Is that what you mean? Is it in terms of just the actual presentation?
Yeah, if it was a kind of a expectation that everyone presented. And the other one, for either of you, I'm in the process of launching AIs, and I had a meeting at the start of the week with the first introduction of that process, and it went down absolutely terribly.
Harriet, sorry, can I just interrupt? Is everybody finding Harriet really, really quiet? Yeah, I don't know. Can you come a bit closer to?
Yeah.
Kaz, I hope that's helpful. Sorry to interrupt.
Sorry, is that clearer?
Yeah, that's a bit better. Thanks.
I just wanted to know if anybody faced any kind of nerves or resistance when bringing in DDIs, because it was quite a shock. I wasn't prepared for the level of resistance I got, because I thought that it was in a very kind of supporting coaching capacity, but there was a lot of concern about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we've got a very receptive staff, and we've had quite a large staff turnover in the last couple of years. So what we have is a staff with lots of kind of buy-in to what we do. But I think what we're coming up against is inherited emotional feelings about observation, because I think the initial assumption is observation by a different name, but just more of it. I think when you go through the first couple of cycles, I think you need to do a really good job in terms of making it feel as transparent, as low threat as possible, as coaching as possible. And I think two of the ways that we managed that was by making it completely transparent, in that we had the list about when the DDIs were taking place, who was observing, at what time were they coming into the lesson, it wasn't no notice, it wasn't hidden. So we put that up in the staff room on a couple of sheets of A3 paper, just to make it as transparent as possible. And then we made sure that we did it with heads of department as well, so they could see the process. And then we very quickly moved on to SLT plus anyone that wanted to do a DDI, because I think what we did, what we found out, and we hadn't considered it from this perspective, is that from a CPD angle, discussing the lesson and giving the feedback is on some occasions even more productive than receiving the feedback. So just before the lockdown, we had moved wholesale to staff them being able to volunteer if they wanted to come and do a DDI, if they didn't mind having another colleague DDIing alongside a member of SLT or a middle leader. And there was a real enthusiasm for it. And it's a shame that we had the lockdown, because that would have been the next natural extension to making it wholly transparent, so that everybody had seen the process from all angles. But I think there will be a natural reaction to anything that feels like an observation initially, but I think if done well, and whoever's doing the feedback is doing it in the way that you've asked them to, in the manner, and almost mini script it as well, to make sure that you're getting that consistency. It only takes a few, I think, negative feedback sessions, or sessions that aren't done in line with the ethos of DDIs, to then create a bit of a stir and suspicion. So yeah, I think it's definitely possible. It might take a round for staff to feel it, experience it, and then become relaxed towards it.
Thank you, Kaz. George, do you want to come in as well?
Yeah, only briefly. I mean, I agree with everything Kaz has just been saying. Now, I think the key for our staff was that we were absolutely clear that we were separating the DDI process from performance management. The only real connection was that, as part of people's appraisal, we wanted them to engage with the process, which is what other schools have done exactly the same. But it didn't end up being a kind of pass-fail, or being able to make a judgment about whether somebody's good or outstanding in the form that observations kind of forced you into, to a certain degree. So I think making it really clear that it was a separate thing, and then ultimately proving that that was the case by, particularly when we implemented the lesson structure in the early stages, actually allowing people that leeway to be able to kind of get it wrong, and then you can steer them back into what you're expecting. And I think that actually, because that was really well received and people could see that that was genuine, and essentially the worst consequence, if you like, was for getting a DVI wrong, as in inverted commas, was that we would come back and help them again. And what tends to happen is, the further people stray from what we're expecting, in a sense, the more support they're going to get, if that makes sense. So I think that's kind of backed it up. So the people that are succeeding the most get the recognition, but they don't, but they get the lighter touch. And those people that need it for whatever reason end up with the most support. And I think that the proof being in the pudding, I think, has convinced people that we've had little or no resistance, to be honest.
Thank you. That's really helpful from both of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Harriet. Becky, do you want to come back in, or is that a legacy hand?
Yeah, no, it is a new hand. Harriet, we're in exactly the same position. So we're actually going to speak next week, aren't we? So it'd be good to talk it through. And we've actually had union involvement with our DDIs as well. So we've actually put them on hold. And I'm not sure whether it's because of the timing for introducing them, because obviously we're further behind in the journey. So we're introducing them at the height of COVID anxiety. And so, yeah, we're putting ours on hold for the time being. And it's interesting, George, you say about separating it from performance, because having consulted with ASCL, you can't actually do that if you're monitoring teaching and learning and not just monitoring something related to what students are doing. It has to become part of the formal monitoring of teaching and learning that a head teacher has a legal duty to do. So although we build them as low stakes, just as you had, unions have got straight on top of it, and we're not a very union driven school, so I think it's just a sign of the times, unfortunately, and we want the plan to work, so we're just going to halt it for a short time.
Thanks, Becky. That sounds sensible. I can see that Jenny is chomping at the bit and has managed to load up her presentation. Thanks, Jenny. Shall I just hand right over to you now?
Yeah, can you see my presentation now?
We can. It's not on full slide view, but we can certainly see it.
Now?
There you go. Perfect. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Hi everyone. I think this presentation may answer some of those concerns that you've had, and obviously Tony had that question about how you kind of actually move people on. I think we've done that quite successfully. So just a little bit of context around MAP. So we kind of obviously there was no results last year, but we were predicting a progress increase of over 1, and we were quite confident in that. So we kind of see ourselves as a hugely improved schools. I think one of only 45 schools in the country who were predicting an increase of that level. And obviously a huge amount has gone into that, not just teaching and learning. So, you know, behaviour, curriculum, assessment. But obviously I'm just going to talk to you about kind of just a teaching and learning strategy that has kind of led to that improvement. We talk to teachers a lot here. We kind of really try and create a culture of continuous improvement. So we talk to teachers, we talk about the psychology of kind of getting better and gaining expertise at particular things. And we looked at kind of these 2 books here, and that kind of what this Joshua Ferrer calls the OK Plateau, where people kind of get good enough at their job to be okay at it, so they stop getting better. And actually research kind of suggests that teachers get there after about 5 years. So we kind of spoke about that as a staff, and we thought about why it's important that we don't reach that OK plateau, and we looked at kind of research to find out, well, how do you get over that? And that's where the kind of psychology comes in, around you know, making sure that you focus on your technique, you kind of constantly get an immediate feedback on your performance. So we call this kind of, we try and force our teachers to stay in what we call the cognitive stage, which is that stage where you are constantly getting better. So just like, I know you spoke about the kind of Green's Law principles, but we've kind of come up with our own, what we call the teaching charter. So it's informed by Rosenshine, and it's informed by Teach Like a Champion. But we very much wanted it to come from within, and we identified as a staff the highest kind of leverage skills and pedagogies that we want to become masters of. And that charter really offers a real clarity of vision, and so that gives us something to coach towards. So our aim as a school is that every teacher will be a master of all of these skills and pedagogies, and we will coach people to get there. But we don't just have kind of like this kind of, you know, stuck on the wall woolly kind of vision. We want to be very clear with staff of like a vision of excellence. So on one of the points on our charter is having every second counts. So to us, that doesn't just mean that you kind of, you know, don't pack up 5 minutes early. We really try and think about what is absolute excellence. What does it really mean to have every second count in a lesson? So we try and use videos a lot to try and record examples of excellence. So I hope this kind of works for you, but just an example of what we mean by saying every second counts when we are kind of on that charter. 5, 3,
2, 1, pens up, drop, green pens up, go.
Did you see that video?
We did. It worked.
Right,
Thanks, Jenny.
So yeah, so we think about, right, okay, so what is absolute excellence? Well, that would be that, you know, those transitions are as slick and as speedy as possible, so we're literally not wasting a second. We kind of have that area of excellence, and then the team of coaches would coach people to be able to achieve that same level of excellence in every classroom. So I talk about coaching, so we don't do DDIs, we follow an incremental coaching model. So each week, I think it is similar in some respects, but every week somebody would, your coach would come in and drop in on you. So 100% of teachers have a coach, including myself. Every member of staff who teaches, it's really important to us that it's not something that's done to people. You know, I want to get better just as much as everybody else does. So every single member of staff has a coach. We have a weekly drop-in, and we don't actually tell people when that's going to be, because our culture is that we have a completely open door policy and anybody can walk into any lesson anytime they like and give each other feedback. So we then have the drop-in. We choose one very small action step, what we call the highest leverage action step, and the coach will then have a meeting with them for about 20 minutes where they will practice that. And I think that's the biggest difference. We have a huge emphasis on practicing that action step. So I think I've got a short little clip of myself actually coaching a member of staff. So I spoke to him about so his action step for that week was, when you circulate, tell the students what you're going to look for. So kind of a name the lap techniques. And then we ask him to practice. So this is what that kind of looks like.
Okay, well, first up, I'm going to turn around now and check if you're using the vocabulary. 1 minute in the manual.
Yeah, okay, great. So just a couple of little things. So that sequence of it was great. So just a couple of tweaks though. When you're century, be more exaggerated with your movement. So that's just a very short clip, but that would be part of a 20-minute meeting where a good 15 minutes of that would be spent practicing until I was certain that that member of staff could go back into the lesson and deliver to the same you know, level of excellence that we practiced in that room. And we've kind of even moved beyond that to what we call live coaching. So now any member of staff really can go into any other member of staff's classroom and offer them suggestions on improvement. So we do that through either non-verbal signals, through the use of whiteboards, or what we call whisper corrections, where we'll just at an appropriate moment just kind of speak to a member of staff and say, oh, maybe if you did this, or if you did this. So again, just a short little clip of an example of what that looks like. So we expect students to have empty hands when the teacher is talking. So he's just written on the whiteboard there, empty hands. So that's kind of how we move on. What Tony was saying, these kind of stuck teachers, we don't allow them to be stuck. We coach them until they can do, you know, until they can master that charter. Very briefly, because I realise we've run out of time. Am I all right, or do you want me to stop, Krista?
No, I would carry on, Jenny. I think hopefully we're all reasonably relaxed about timing. If people need to go, they can drop out, but I think it's important that you have the time to continue.
Okay, thanks. So then we also have, it's not just, so we have the teaching charter for teachers, but then we also want to be transparent with students. So we have these icons that go into lessons that kind of elaborate on elements of the charter that would require a specific routine from either a teacher or a student. So these would go onto lesson PowerPoints, so that when the students see them, they know how they should respond. And we have a centrally planned curriculum, so it really supports with that as well, that if you're not planning the lesson, you see the icon, you know what you should be doing as a teacher. And we share that to students each week. We have an icon of the week where we kind of share it with students, explain to them what they should be doing when they see the icon, and then we share examples of excellence with the students in an assembly. And then just very briefly, because there's obviously huge amounts of ways that we quality assure to make sure this is all actually working, but just a kind of overview. So a huge one is that we make sure the coaches are of a really high quality, and we do lots of training. In fact, my coaches are in training right now, being trained up to make sure that they're the highest quality. We have a system which you may or may not have heard of called Powerful Action Steps, which kind of tracks all of the coaching. So I have a really strong overview of what every single member of staff is working on, and can kind of plan CPD accordingly. We track elements of the charter, so we will go, myself and my team of lead practitioners will have a look at an element of the charter. So last week we were looking at threshold, and we will just go and have a look around the school, kind of red, amber, green it, and any areas of red we will offer support to those teachers. You know, sometimes it's just a conversation. They're like, yeah, because I'm really struggling to get from this classroom to this classroom. Okay, what can we do about that? And then we can kind of solve those problems. Each half term, staff heads of department get involved with this, and they do their own review based on their coaching and their action steps, and they have areas of development which then I go and have a look at. We have lots of staff voice, so when you're talking about impact, not only obviously are we seeing hugely improved outcomes and practice around the school, the staff voice is really positive. So I think we asked people to rate their experience of coaching out of 10, and it was 9.6, I think it came out of in the end. So staff really you know, are really on board with the coaching program. The kind of culture has really shifted in the school to one of just there's just no fear about anybody walking into a lesson at any time and offering feedback. And we also kind of have these things called teacher shout outs, so where we kind of we give people a shout out. You can see one in the corner of the screen there, and that gets emailed to the teachers, so it all becomes really positive. So sorry, that was very brief at the end there, but that's it. So if you have any questions, obviously feel free.
Thank you, Jenny. I'm really glad that your videos worked, because it just really perfectly exemplified some of the sort of theory that you were describing. Any questions? I've got lots actually, but I'll probably need to have those with you offline. But I'll just pause for a second there if anybody wants to chip in. Mr. Bloxham?
So I just wanted to say something really obvious, that in a time where it's quite difficult for people to go and visit and spend lots of time in other people's schools, I'm just thinking of Becky here, and I'm thinking of Harriet. You know, to have a colleague from another school come and explain what they're doing kind of might demystify some of this. You know, it's not just something that's happening at Denport High, or there are other schools in the system that are doing this sort of stuff, and having that explanation might help you with your change management. And of course you can do that remotely. You could do that remotely, couldn't you? You could present into a staff remotely. Just an observation.
I agree, actually. I think it would.
Thank you. Harriet, sorry, could you speak up a little bit, Harriet, for us?
Sorry. I was just saying, I can see that it'd be really helpful to have a different voice, an external voice, to kind of open the conversation in my school to everything else that's going on here. Because otherwise people have my perception of things, but not necessarily a wider picture. So yeah, I can see that would be a really helpful process. Thank you.
Thank you. George? You're on mute, George.
Sorry, schoolboy error there. I was really interested in a lot of what Jen was saying, but in particular, you mentioned a couple of times about that real open door policy, which I think a lot of schools talk about. It sounds like you really have got. I was just interested in the kind of uptake that you get. I mean, do you really mean anyone can go into anyone's room at any time? And I was just interested in their response, because I really like the idea, but I just wanted to find how that had gone and how that had evolved.
Yeah, so anyone can walk into anyone's lesson anytime, and nobody would ever say anything about that. We really do have that coaching culture here. So how we kind of got there was the initial launch of coaching was very important, to get people to understand the kind of the why behind it. And then making sure that the coaches themselves are really highly trained so that people are seeing the value in it is also important. It was massively important that it didn't come kind of from the top down, so that, you know, it's hugely important, I think, for the perception of it, that I have a coach myself and that all of the coaches are coached. So it's not just like something that's being done to them, it's we're on this journey together. And then ultimately it becomes quite easy if you've got really highly trained coaches, because teachers see themselves getting better. So when you get the staff voice on it, people, you know that they're getting better, and then it becomes a really easy sell. So then the next step of that was then the live coaching, once people were comfortable with the coaching with their own coach, and that's really important, the relationship. So the coaches were able to build really strong, trusting relationships. So once that was embedded, we were then able to move towards live coaching, which we started with a small pilot group to get a small number of staff on board with that. Then they were able to say, yeah, this live coaching is great, because actually as a teacher, it's weird, isn't it? You wouldn't see a student doing something wrong and then leave the room and then tell them about it later. Like you fix things in the moment. That's much more efficient, and people, just got on board with it really quickly. And then, so it's just all of the doors open all of the time. Anyone can walk in and offer kind of feedback on a whiteboard or non-verbal, or however they want to do it.
Thank you, Jenny. Can I just ask a quick question about the coaching? When you say that you've got a coach, is there a flat coaching kind of culture, in the sense that your coach, would it be a peer, or could it be anybody in the school who's leadership coaching?
Yeah, no, it's not leadership coaching. I'm coached on my teaching. So,
yeah, but it's with fellow teachers, I suppose, is my question.
Yeah, no, I have a team of coaches, so it's the coaches have to themselves be expert teachers, and we have a CPD route that leads people to becoming a coach. We have an expert teacher CPD route, which is an optional route for people to sign up to if they wanted to become a coach, but the coaches themselves are kind of the best teachers in the school, and so that's important. So they need to be able to, there's a whole host of skills that the coaches have to have, so we need them to be the right team.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. And when you did with the video clip where you showed the chap who you were giving the feedback to, and he was kind of practicing that actionable step in the empty classroom, I've never seen that before. How was that? Did you have to get over any hurdles or barriers around that approach? Did people find that difficult?
Yeah, I think a few things found that difficult initially, definitely. But again, it's just like anything. It's just how you kind of normalize it. And we talk about how it's not role play, because you're not pretending to be somebody else. This is you kind of practicing before you go live. We talk a lot about like how even the best actors have to rehearse their lines. So it's just like anything else, isn't it? It's about thinking carefully about how you're going to get buy-in from your staff. And just other opportunities. When can you drop in practice? So we have teaching and learning briefings where we drop in bits of practice. When you're thinking about a new routine around behaviour, we all practice together. So it's just about finding the opportunities to normalise it, I think.
Yeah, great, thank you. I'm just conscious of time. It's 5 o'clock, so we have gone a little bit over, but I think it was well worth it. Any final questions or comments or observations before we wrap up? Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much, Jenny, Kaz, and George. That went exactly as I'd hoped. In that, I think it's really opened the door to hopefully lots of kind of follow-up conversations. I think the work that you're all doing in on this call, that stuff around pedagogy and school improvement and developing practice, is the hardest part of school leadership, I think, and it's the kind of the weight of the responsibility of the improvement in student learning and outcomes rests with you, and I think if this can be the beginning of a professional learning network that is genuinely open, and I think we've demonstrated that tonight, and trusting of peers in the city to be able to share practice and challenge and interrogate and question, then tonight did exactly what I was hoping it would do on the tin. Actually, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. I think I'll be guided by you in terms of where we go next with this. We don't have to have a conversation now, but if you want to drop me an email, I think it would be really good to continue this conversation, and I'd be really keen for it to continue in this format. I think, as for the reasons that Tony suggested earlier, there'll be other people, I'm sure, in the city and people in on this call who want to be given the opportunity to sort of showcase their practice and then take some of that peer support and suggestions moving forward. The other exciting development is that an area of the portal has been developed really quickly in the last couple of weeks to facilitate that sort of secure online communication that we're piloting at the moment with a maths group, probably through till January. It's moved on. Kaz, I know you were part of the original conversations when I was working with the Step Alliance with Gavin. It's moved on significantly since that first iteration that you saw, and it's now something much more intuitive and enjoyable to use. So it'd be really exciting to share that with you in January and see whether that's an area that we can continue the conversation. So please drop me an email, give us some feedback on this session and how useful you found it, and any suggestions in taking it forward would be really gratefully received. And I think we will wrap up there. So thank you and enjoy the rest of your evenings.